The first game in the chronology of the second generation of Game Boy has a slightly odd release date to it. You might notice that the Japanese version of this game debuted in September of 1998, which may strike the more astute of you as a little strange, seeing as how the color wasn't released in Japan until October 21st, almost a month later. Indeed, skip forward to the next review and we're into the launch titles that did come out on that day. So what's going on here? And why is this not simply classed as a DMG Game Boy game? Well, to answer that second part, the simple truth is that this game is color compatible, and it was always going to be. If you're lucky enough to have one of the earlier editions, it'll be in the good old grey shell, but pop it into your Game Boy Color and you'll still get the full color experience. This was such an early release that Nintendo hadn't even finalized their cartridge designs for the new system. It was reprinted after the fact, and of course by 2000 the Western releases are in black shells, so that you wouldn't even realize there was ever a difference. Why Enix didn't want to wait a month for the official console launch is not clear, but seeing as how the game is backwards compatible with the pre-existing handheld anyway, they didn't really need to. Let's take a little detour here while we're on the subject. You'll see in the game information box a line that says Dual Mode. If yes, then that means the game can be played on an original Game Boy as well as the Color, but it's a little more than simply being backwards compatible, like say playing a PS1 game in your PS2, or an original Game Boy game on your Color. In fact, it's sort of like the opposite of that in a way. In dual mode enabled GBC games, there's actually a setting that allows the game to be decolorized and played on the older console. This isn't as simple as merely grayscaling the game though. Think of it this way, on the DMG each pixel can be one of 4 shades, but on the GBC this is vastly increased. There are, allegedly, 32,000 colors supported. Sure, there can only ever be a maximum of 56 loaded into memory at any one time, but even so, this is way more than 4. So often the graphics had to have 2 different versions, one for monochrome and one for color, hence the dual mode moniker. This goes some way to explain why a lot of games have to be GBC only. Once you start utilizing the extra power and graphical capabilities that the new console had, translating that game down to the DMG level wouldn't come out all that well. And as the library goes on into the 2000s, we'll start to see fewer and fewer Type B cartridges. But look, you're watching a Game Boy Color game video, so I'm assuming you're playing these games in all their full color glory anyway. This is the first title in what has become a rather successful spin-off series from the Dragon Quest franchise. At time of writing, the series is alive and well, with the 2023 Switch release The Dark Prince. The one we're concerned with here is kind of a prequel to the 1995 title Dragon Quest VI: Realms of Revelation, released on Super Famicom. We meet protagonists Terry and Millie back when they were children, taking them through a quite different adventure to the one they'd face later in life. Now, I flat out refuse to use the phrase Pokémon clone to describe these sorts of games. It's dumb for several reasons. One, acting like Pokémon was the first game to employ the tropes of catching and training monsters is flat out incorrect. Two, this game doesn't really feel like Pokémon when you're playing it. It's a lazy-ass sentiment to put in your reviews. 3, video game genres are a thing, you know, and gatekeeping genre-specific mechanics to only one franchise is a really bizarre concept that you don't see in other genres, as if the game loses all merit of its own simply because they deigned to put a monster-catching gimmick in there. It'd be like calling every first-person shooter a Doom clone, or, ironically, labeling every turn-based RPG a Dragon Quest clone. You'd be wrong to do so for exactly the same reasons I just mentioned. Try to be a little more insightful than that, please. Anyway, the game. As Terry, you need to recruit a squad of monsters to help you rescue your sister, starting as we mean to go on with the rescue the damsel stuff, I see. It is a Game Boy game after all. She's been kidnapped by the evil Waraboo. You'll start out with the king's old buddy, Slib the Slime, and from there can build a varied team of monsters, training them up to try to win various arena competitions and eventually the Monster Trainer's Starry Night tournament. With Slib in tow, you'll wander around randomly generated dungeons fighting random battles. You don't fight them yourself, but use your monsters, which can earn experience points and get stronger as they do so. After the fights, defeated monsters may decide to come along with you, and you can set out meat to persuade them to join up. Any monsters that don't fit into your party can go to live on the farm, not in the way your old dog did when you were a kid. Here, you can have up to 19 awake and 19 asleep monsters. Leaving them awake allows them to slowly train and grow in strength, but also leads them to becoming wilder. As you train up monsters, they lose this wilderness level, becoming more domesticated and responsive in battle. Putting a monster to sleep, again, not in that way, stops them going feral, but also means they won't increase in strength until you take them out again. When monsters level up, they can also gain skills as well as their stats, and can learn up to 8 of these at any one time. Their thresholds for leveling up vary depending on what class of monster they belong to, as well as what's called their plus number, determined through their breeding, which can give buffs to certain stats such as HP or attack power. Some monsters may take a few hundred XP to get to a certain level, whereas others might have requirements for the same level in the thousands. All in all, it's a very well-balanced leveling system where you'll have to really work to get the best team. There are several commands you can use in battle to direct your monsters. Choosing Charge will tell them to go all out in attack. Mixed lets your monsters be a bit savvier. Finally, Cautious monsters can sometimes heal themselves without using MP or any sort of healing spell, useful if you're in a long battle or without a healer. Also, you're able to direct the team to attack or to use special skills such as magic attacks or healing. Note that in the arena matches, you're not able to give commands directly to the monsters. You have to train them beforehand to be strong enough, then let them fight themselves. The arena fights are therefore quite a bit more straightforward than the main game. You'll take your team of 3 through a trilogy of increasingly difficult battles against other trios. As mentioned, you have less control over the battles and cannot use special attacks or even items. It's simply a test of strength and resilience. Later classes cost more money. You'll start at class G and have to periodically climb the ranks to get to S class. What sets the Dragon Quest Monsters series apart, or at least it did back then, is the breeding system. There's something like 200 or so different monsters you can recruit throughout the game, some of which can only be acquired through breeding. This was before Gold and Silver did it, and it's quite in-depth here. In fact, you'll struggle more and more as the game goes on without doing this, so don't ignore this crucial game mechanic. Essentially, each creature will be one of 2 genders, and by breeding various combinations, you can create new monsters. And this is definitely how reproduction works. I saw it in a picture book. You can breed 2 monsters in single-player mode, or even via the link cable, through which both players will get one of a set of twins. The offspring's stats are calculated based on their parents' stats and level, with higher level parents granting stat bonuses to their little ones. Parents A and B get their stats added together, any plus numbers added, and then divided by 4. This will determine what the new monster's stats are at level 1. So let's say you have 2 compatible monsters. If the highest level parent is, say, level 80, then the offspring will have a plus number of 4, granting supreme stat boosts. You can see just how powerful your team will become after several generations if you're prepared to put the work in. Not only stats, but monster skills, resistances, and even personalities can be passed down through the generations as well. I won't go into any more detail here. Suffice to say, this is one game that'll take some study to get the most out of. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course. I love the Dragon Quest universe, and while Monsters perhaps doesn't feel quite as fleshed out as some of its contemporaries in terms of lore, it's certainly not as immersive storyline-wise as the aforementioned Pokemon Gen 2, for example. Any fan of the mainline games can't help but feel right at home here. And if you have a friend who also owns the game, there's so much more for you to do via linking, but the game has a ton to get your teeth into, even if you just want to play it on your own. Dungeons are randomized, which was perhaps not strictly necessary here, but it doesn't detract at all. As an early showcase of the colorization capabilities of the new console, it's nothing super flashy or anything, but a citizen of 1998, used to the pea-soup screen for all those years, would no doubt have been blown away by it. I'm very excited about delving into the less explored and oft maligned Game Boy Color library. Life's definitely better in full color after all. Let's hope the games are too.